Hi, hello. So thank you very much for coming. On behalf of America Society, we would like to thank everyone for coming to our roundtable discussion about the exhibition Tropical is Political. I would like to introduce Marina Reyes Franco, the curator of the exhibition, who is also the curator of the Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de Puerto Rico, who is going to be in conversation with Dave Smith, with Joiri Minaya, and Oneika Russell. We will have 10 minutes at the end for questions from the audience, so please keep your questions and enjoy. Again, thank you so much for coming.
Hi. Hi, my name is Marina. Thank you so much for coming and joining us for this. It was one of the Caribbean parallel activities to Puerto Rican Art Week in New York. I'm very, very happy to be in conversation with these artists because honestly, I hadn't even seen the show. I was pregnant, couldn't even be here for the opening. I am very, very thankful for America Society and their wonderful team for putting together this exhibition while I was, in Puerto Rico, super pregnant. And also because it is not the culmination, but definitely one of what I guess is an unofficial third exhibition in a series of exhibitions related to the impact of tourism in cultural production in the Caribbean, and hopefully, a research that will grow and expand beyond just the Caribbean. So just a little background, in 2017, I got a travel grant to travel to 5 countries. I'm from Puerto Rico, so that's the 6th. But I went to the Dominican Republic, the Bahamas, Jamaica, Trinidad, and Panama. So the show, because I didn't want to randomly pick and choose artists and artworks for an exhibition. So I decided to just keep it to the places and people, context that I knew, that I researched, and the artists that I met along the way, I guess. So it includes artists from those from those countries, their diasporas, and also Gladys Gamby, who's an artist from Martinique that we spent some time in Aruba during a residency in 2018. So the show explores themes of resignification of landscapes, territories, displacement, financial schemes, and their relationship between body and territory, and how we present ourselves, how we perform, where we're from at times as well. So that is just a general introduction to the exhibition that hopefully you've seen or you'll be able to see later on downstairs. There's a publication that accompanies it, which you can also grab. But this time, I want to, give the floor to to our guests, Dave Smith, Joiri Minaya, and Oneika. I think that, we can start I want to start with Dave, actually. And I think that we can be very descriptive about the works that are in the show, just to give more context to our audience. But it was one of the first works that I knew that I wanted to include in the show. The painting definitely is one of the anchors that we were very thankful to be able to include. And I guess that one of the things that also sets you apart from the rest of the group is that you're not originally from the Caribbean, but there is something that kind of ties together all their works for this conversation, which I guess is I think I'm proposing that it is how others view people in the Caribbean, but also how the people in the Caribbean are othered. But anyways,
Right.
I just want to give you the floor to talk about a little bit more about your piece. Please.
Okay. Well, the painting I have in the show is a painting called Night and Day-O, which of course is a reference to the
song,
the Caribbean song, the Arabella Fonte song, and it kind of the painting had a strange evolution because it started off as a painting half the size. As it happened, it's made up of 2 canvases, but it started off as 1 canvas. And it started off, and it was painted in the U.S. because I lived. The painting is about 10 years old, and I've lived in Los Angeles now for over 30 years. So it was actually painted in Los Angeles, but the top part of the painting is a painting of the U.S. at night. I'd seen some photographs of various countries around the world taken at night, and it was kind of interesting because it kind of shows where the human activity is and how much human activity there is. So in the case of the U.S., you know, the most of the lights were on the East Coast, and then there were little sections like in the middle of the Nevada desert, and then of course the West Coast was kind of lit up, and I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. So that's how the painting started, and because even though I left the Bahamas in 1990, but I've been going back several times a year.
And you were in the Bahamas since independence, since 1973.
I arrived in the Bahamas in 1973, which was the year they went independent from Britain. And so I was there for 17 years. And I spent most of my adult life in the Bahamas. I went when I was 28 or 29, and I left when I was 45. So that's kind of a big chunk of my adult life. So I guess the bottom half of the picture is a picture of the Caribbean, and all the kind of and it includes all the preconceptions and all the kind of stereotypical images that people have of the Caribbean. Everything from muscular guys with bananas on their shoulders, and to limbo dancers, to and there's a kind of a transition because the Bahamas is so close to the U.S. It's a matter of 40, 50 miles away. So there's a lot of U.S. cultural presence in the Bahamas, and that's essentially what the painting is about. And
actually, like, something that has always caught my attention is that, like, it was full of like, American influence has been there for a very long time, like loyalists who took their loyalists that took their enslaved people to the Bahamas. Like, it also kind of reminds me of a situation in Puerto Rico as well, where like as parts of South America were becoming independent, then like people would just go to Puerto Rico. Or, like, Cuba had its revolution, like the Cubans who were opposed to it went to Puerto Rico. So then, like, we have these entrenched, like, more conservative, entrenched communities, and so it kind of hinders certain kind of social progress as well.
And the center of the painting is a series of horizontal bodies. In the top part of the painting, within the U.S. continent, or within the U.S. kind of section, is I think a dead cowboy, obviously taken from a TV movie, and then I think there's a limbo dancer in a horizontal position, and then there are several murder victims in a horizontal position, and then there's a woman swimming or snorkeling, and then there's a whole series of people in horizontal
Yeah, it's
position,
like
but in different
leisure and-
circumstances.
Yeah, it's just like the horizontality of leisure or
right.
death.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that the first piece that I saw of yours was maybe a collage of that.
Right. There was a
I think.
there was a preliminary kind of study for that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was kind of half paint, half collage. Yeah. But it was basically the same. The same concept. Yeah. And the idea was that everything was kind of raining down from the U.S. Everything was streaming down from the U.S. into the Caribbean.
Yeah, a lot of the, and I think this is also something that is echoed in Jamaica tourism and tourism history, that there was a lot of American influence in the way that the industry was developed, and because of the proximity, like the kind of like social hierarchy that was installed was like belonging to the south of the U.S. So all that kind of, all that segregation was imposed in the tourism spaces, in the hotel spaces. So that is also something that resonates, maybe not so much, probably still in contemporary times.
Yeah, and of all the Caribbean countries, you know, I think the Bahamas is most influenced. There's more of a U.S. cultural presence in the Bahamas than probably any other country in the Caribbean, mostly because of its proximity and of course the huge influx of tourists on a continual basis.
Unlike part-time residents.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, like tax schemes and such.
And of course, Albert Bierstadt, who was one of the Hudson River School painters of the 19th century, kind of went to the Bahamas early on, and all those Hudson River artists were the 19th century artists were kind of responsible for the kind of development into the Western United States, and they painted all these cinematic paintings of Yosemite, of Grand Canyon, and they were always very overstated and lush and overdramatic. And Bierstadt did visit the Bahamas on several occasions and did some idyllic Caribbean sort of paintings,
picturesque,
and which really triggered off that whole concept of the Caribbean as a place of leisure, or a kind of an idyllic environment, which didn't take into account any of the social landscape of the country. And I think that was one of the themes really of this whole exhibition, that the touristic effect of how it's affected the national identity and the national
psyche.
The national psyche really.
I wanted you to tell the anecdote of the drive-in movie theater.
Yeah.
And like, because when you first moved to the Bahamas, like what the work that you were doing, the painting that you were doing back when you lived in England, it was very, very different to the figurative work that you started doing in the Bahamas. But then this anecdote, and then that.
Yeah, in England, I was essentially an abstract painter. I'd gone through art school basically as an abstract painter, and at the time that seemed to be the only relevant painting to be doing at the time. Although in the early '60s, of course, the English pop scene happened, and the American pop scene happened, and I think all of that had an effect on my sensibility. But when I first arrived in the Bahamas, it didn't seem that abstract painting was a very, it didn't seem to me at that time that it was a very appropriate thing to do into what the Bahamian environment was at that time, particularly the kind of art environment. And I thought it would have been sort of too elitist. I didn't think it would have been very accessible. And I was interested in, doing something that was that was a little bit more relevant. And I guess I had an epiphany of sorts by going to a drive-in movie, because at the time there were two drive-in theaters in the Bahamas. Not anymore, but there were two at that time. And I'd never been to a drive-in theater before. We don't have drive-in theaters in the UK. And the first time I visited a drive-in, it was kind of dusk. It wasn't totally dark. So you had this screen up in the sky, and there were American movies were being projected onto what was essentially a Caribbean sky, with silhouettes of palm trees and whatever in the distance. And this whole idea of American sort of cultural artifacts projected onto the Caribbean sky, that really, that kind of, that became an epiphany in the sense that, I think my paintings are collage oriented. I mean, in the way they're put together. And so that became the genesis of that process of collage. That is, superimposing images from one culture on top of another culture, and that's really remained the essence of my paintings ever since. That kind of juxtaposition and that superimposing one thing onto another thing.
Yeah, it's even evocative of your own biography right now, right? I mean, like, moving from one place to the other, juxtaposing, like, cultural influences and images. Yeah. And then bringing that to the paintings. Even when you move to LA, like there's a continuous back and forth from the Bahamas. And just a while ago, we were talking about the similarities between LA and Nassau. And Nassau, right? Yeah, but I mean, I think I was always, particularly on arriving in the Bahamas, I was always aware of this kind of overlay of contradictions or whatever, because you got in the Bahamas, you got essentially images from an African heritage, images from a colonial past, and this was being interpreted or processed by someone from England, brought up on English culture, as it were. And so there's always been this kind of lateral kind of perspective. And when I moved to Los Angeles from the Bahamas, the imagery in my painting changed somewhat, because I was suddenly confronted by a whole new environment. But the process of the paintings remained the same, because the similarities were that both Nassau and Los Angeles were sun cultures. They both had similar climates, and they also had been mythologized in some way. But Los Angeles through movies, and they kind of and the Bahamas through tourist brochures, and in these idealistic environments, it's kind of a difficult environment to live up to when you're actually there, because it was like I started using postcard images in the Bahamas, and as I have done in Los Angeles as well, because the postcards were always very specific in their content.
I mean, the island where most of the population is in the Bahamas, which is an island about 22 miles wide and maybe 7 or 8 miles, or 7 or 8 miles wide and maybe 20 plus miles miles long. But every postcard, every photograph for the postcard was taken in basically a square mile area, which is where the beaches were, where the hotels were, and they had nothing to do with the social fabric of the Bahamas at all. They just had to do with this very cosmetic kind of concept of the Bahamas as being, you know, as being an idyllic and you know, this kind of unreal, this unreal paradise kind of thing.
I think that a lot of other countries in the Caribbean also feel like we have to like live up to like the Bahamas water and beaches and like sand colors, and it has even become an issue in terms of like stealing sand from one place to the other, not only for construction, which is actually what happens in Puerto Rico, but just like to make it prettier, to like have pink sand from, you know, X beach or whatever. Like if it doesn't look like that, then it's not desirable. I know that it happens it happens in Jamaica, it happens in the Dominican Republic. Like they'll steal sand from a public beach to take it to the resort beaches. It's just super oppressive, the whole construction of this imagery, and that actually takes me to well, obviously both of your works, but I wanted to talk with so that Oneika could talk about the process behind the work that is in the exhibition. The kind of souvenirs that she's showing in Tropical is Political, but also like the selection of not only the selection of images, but the choice to have it done by you know, as a mechanical process, and the choice of words.
Yeah, I think listening to Dave and also remembering a similar process of collecting postcards, and so it tells me that it stands out to people, to anybody actually, because I think that was before I entered art school. So probably in my teens I was just collecting postcards because at the time it was very pretty, beautiful. So that was important for me as a starting place to see the way we present ourselves. And of course, I have built a collection over time, and I've noticed that different islands have a particular way. So in Jamaica, there are no people in our postcards, where in other islands there's a certain type of person. So I was always fascinated, like, why are there no people? Like, it's just a place. Later on, I started looking at Ocho Rios, which is a popular tourism town, and buying the items there and noticing that.
And it's also a cruise ship spot, right?
Destination, and also used to be the hub of sandals, which is like, I know it's beamed into the US on TV. You can book a nice quick trip. And so I started collecting those things, and it was very interesting to me because it was new immigrants to the island who maybe came from Southeast Asia, who had noticed also like what the desire or the palette was for souvenirs to build a business. And then they would order something from a company it's based in the US, but it processes in China, a gift core, and then you can just add any beach. You can put Jamaica or Dominican Republic or Bahamas on it, but it's the same beach. And so I found that very interesting.
Do you know which beach it is? Like where,
It's
from where in the world?
Somebody designed it, and we said that's the beach. it must have a palm tree, and it must have a certain amount of sand and certain amount of kind of portion of the sun in a certain way. So anyway, all of that was like background to the thing that, okay, let me settle on if I were to produce something as my own, because clearly if I am an artist coming from Jamaica, I may be more related to a craftsperson who produces the souvenirs than an artist. So it's kind of playful. It's kind of like, let me see what it would be like to step into the world of being a craftsperson. So let me try to produce a souvenir. And then of course, normally it would have Jamaica, but I thought I would try to mine deeper and say, okay, when you buy that souvenir, what are you actually looking for? So maybe you're looking for a representation of what's local or native. So certain keywords started coming up, native, and then of course it's exotic. I lived outside of Jamaica for a while and was called exotic for a while, so it was actually a reality. And then of course there's love. People come for love a lot, or a kind of love, and just these variations. So for a solo show I did in Kingston, I started trying to stitch it by hand, because at the time I was thinking that that process of putting like actual human touch in it was intercepting that kind of quick sale, order from China, sell it here type of process. But of course the production started to become like a business in a way. So in talks with Marina, I was telling her, like, I would love to actually just set up a kind of production process that is like a souvenir shop. And so we talked about using embroidery, and so I had started talks with, okay, if we do it locally, the point is to intercept these overseas things, so let's have a local producer. So we found a local embroidery machinist who, she's also a woman who tried to build her business, and used her. I used some kind of caricatured imagery, and we worked together. It was like she was trying to figure out, what are you doing? Like, why are you asking me to do all these things? Because it's not like her business normally.
What were the conversations like? Because I think that part of the like, you're using a form that is familiar to people that have seen like old school souvenirs, Jamaican souvenirs, but then by like introducing these particular words, it creates a conversation, and it problematizes something that is like ideas that are deeply entrenched in the culture, or maybe something that feels oppressive to to part of the population. Like, I guess it was sort of a first try. Like, how would someone react to the work?
Yeah. It's of course uncomfortable for me to make it, but I also want that discomfort to lead to maybe a place of honesty, because then we can look, if you're from Jamaica or you're not from Jamaica, we can all look at that work and we can agree that, okay, the word exotic and native together make me uncomfortable, but then why does it make me uncomfortable? And also there's a truth, because like Jamaicans and perform. There is a performance of, and I was just trying to find the words to say, like, not just perform of their own free will, but there's an industry that was set up that they could participate in, and then tourists come and they also agree to perform those transactions. Of course, it's a part of the economy. It's important.
Yeah, maybe not so much in Kingston, but definitely. I mean, I spent some time in Montego Bay, and it was, very. The performance is very obvious. It's uncomfortable if you're not, and if you don't enjoy that.
Yeah.
But it is very uncomfortable, and it just, yeah, I mean, it like you know that the person that is giving the tour is not happy giving the tour. You know, it's like it's something that it's kind of the burden of having to do this because it's the way that you have to earn a living, and it just conditions all the relationships that you can have, that you can establish in visiting a place.
Yeah, no, I think that there is discomfort, but I think one of the things I would add is, so there's Anansi as a folk tale character who is a trickster is a big part of, I would say, Jamaican, not just folklore, but also I think it's absorbed into the personality as well. So the idea that, okay, I will perform this if it gets me this, in places like Ocheria's, people have taken a kind of agency in saying, okay, at day I am this dancer with I don't know, whatever it is, a basket or whatever. And then people use that type of access for different things so that they can transform that. And I think that becomes a way of taking what is already there and building on top. So you kind of come out with a type of power in some way. I don't know, it's probably in the other islands as well.
Yeah, I think that in Dominican women Google search there is some of that search for power as well.
Yeah. It's like I was listening to you talking and I was thinking like making lemonade with lemons or something. It's like this is your situation.
Yeah, and you don't. I guess in Puerto Rico it would be bregar. In Spanish, it's like you deal with it, and yeah, bregar has many possible translations actually, but I guess it applies to this. It's like you don't have to reveal yourself to the people that are just there for a couple of days. You don't have to be real with them. You can perform. Like if that's what it takes, then like they can perform. That's fine. Just I also wanted to highlight the fact that you've also done research on the subject and written about it. So it's like a preamble for you to like to give us just your own insight into the research you've done and in Jamaica.
Yeah, I think so. I think I mentioned some of that research, which is that early fascination. But after returning to Jamaica, and I think it's probably describing a little bit what Dave was talking about, like going to almost like returning to Jamaica after studies. It's like I could see a lot of things for the first time, and so I started really thinking about, oh, this is really a construction and a performance, and we do all these things, souvenirs being just like one of the things. And so I wrote this essay called Constructing Paradise in the Western Imagination, and it was really more of a visual essay, which when I met Marina in Kingston, she saw some of the images that were used to illustrate that essay, which was me taking this Gauguin painting of the two Tahitian women and transforming it into like an island or all these variations of what these women could represent for paradise. And so that's one way that I'm looking at is, okay, how can I write about it? But also for me, the making of the work is very important. So an extension of this work could potentially be something that I would like to probably look at is, how can I make this work into something that gathers like economic figures and gathers data through perhaps potentially setting up a real shop where people can buy, and then gathering kind of data information about it that way.
You mean like who is buying it?
Who is buying, what they're buying, amounts that are being bought, where, because those numbers are also really fascinating for how souvenirs also get to Jamaica. We import a lot from overseas.
Yeah, like what people like. What are the tastes of the people who go there?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's exciting for me to see that people remember that particular velvet souvenir. Dave was telling me he had a collection.
Really?
As well, yes, which I want to see. And I was doing research for this talk and found that New York has its own history of these velvet souvenirs, but it's interesting that those souvenirs have buildings, like this building and that building. So it's like the identity of the place is on like the historic monuments, where you have one for like Mexico, and it's a woman with a basket. And so it's just interesting how we all select that thing that we agree is this place,
It's a little bit like that tradition of painting on velvet, which is a kind of which is a phenomena as well, like a tourist kind of souvenir thing. I've got a painting in my collection of an Elvis, of a Las Vegas
Beautiful.
Era Elvis, and he's painted on black velvet, and he's got a tear. It could be sweat, but he's got either a bead of perspiration or a bead of sweat running down his face, and
Rhinestone sweat.
But the painting on velvet has a certain, particularly black, and it's usually black velvet, and so it has a very dramatic effect when you put color, because colors look very intense on a black background. But so these tourist souvenirs that Oneika was referring to, I remember them in the Bahamas, and they always came in they were always either pillowcase or cushion covers, or they were little scrolls, hanging scrolls, and they had kind of limbo dances and whatever, and they were linear in quality. The ones I remember, they were linear in quality, but a lot of the linear had glitter. They had kind of glitter in it as well. So
like your painting. Like your painting.
Yeah, well, in fact, I did use them. I bought a couple of these, years ago, and I still have them. I kind of unrolled them out of storage a little while ago, and they've not aged too well, actually. They're not really, the black has lost a lot of its kind of intensity. But
I need to do some
but I
research
used
on
a lot of those images in the painting, the stylized kind of, the stylized figure drawings of limbo dancers and
I just realized that I need to do some digging, like on souvenirs in Puerto Rico. I don't think so. I do remember the Dominican dolls were big in the 90s in Puerto Rico.
They're still big in the souvenir
shops.
But
but the strange thing about a lot of tourist souvenirs, and I think Oneika referred to this, is that particularly in the case of the Bahamas, the souvenirs were not made in the Bahamas. They were never made. They were made in the Philippines or Taiwan or any number of countries. But and so they took on that kind of, because they were produced in those countries. And I'm not sure what was sent over there and in relation to what came back. But, you can see the way the figures are drawn, and you see the way certain vegetations are drawn. Maracas was another thing, those kind of, the maraca shakers. And, you see the same imagery, whether you see them in Mexico, whether you see them in the Caribbean, or wherever you see them.
That's why there's the T-shirt.
Very extreme, but also drawn like a calligraphic thing. It's just quick, slick. But palm trees and kind of people sleeping under palm trees and all those kind of stereotypical images. Yeah.
But there's the famous T-shirt, right? Like same bleep, different island, because it's it's the same souvenirs that are just printed with or distributed with different names under it. So
I find it interesting, the difference. Because I've been collecting, I've asked people to, if we go to Grenada, for example, please bring me back the thing that's maybe a textile-based souvenir, so that there's some kind of level. But it's really interesting to see what is the difference, because you have the option to have the same image, but people choose to have something slightly different. So in Grenada, for example, or Antigua, I noticed that there's a real focus on dancing, like the figures should be dancing as the main thing, or in some islands it's like the figures should be working. So I love that there's like this thing, even on that same map, there's something different.
I feel like that's also resonating a lot with some of the fabrics that I've been collecting that like picture tropical pattern. And there's one specific pattern that looks totally Hawaiian, but it has like Jamaica, Dominican Republic, like they just switched the names, and I have like different fabrics.
So it's the
that,
same.
It's the exact same. It's the same pattern. They sometimes change the color. Like I've seen it in blue, pink, yellow, and green. And then it says all of these different islands' names. I'm really curious where this is produced, but the aesthetic looks very like, I don't know, Hawaiian patterns from the 50s or something. Yeah.
Well, actually, some of the, like two of the print pieces. So Joiri has a video installation and 2 prints in the show, and definitely the prints are kind of, from collectibles.
Right. Yeah, they're from postcards that I've been collecting throughout the years. Yeah, should I just like go off? Okay. So
If you want.
sure.
But also what you mentioned about the fabric, it's like
Yeah.
prints have, since of course, first of all, you went to school in a school that used to be inside a resort, which also it's like its own little like mind fuck of its own.
Yeah.
And beyond that, when you came to New York, that's when you found this fabric, and that kind of kickstarted a whole series of works that has developed over time till now, that you're producing your own prints, your own like researched prints that are not just like generic kind of reproductions. Right?
Yeah. I was just talking about Chabon the other day, the school that I went to. And it's interesting because like now I'm realizing that we were in that resort, but when you're there you don't really, it's like a bubble, so you don't really interact with much of the resort people. There's even really fucked up like class and access divisions within the school, not within the school but in relation to like the students within that complex. So like we use the service entrance to enter the school, not the main entrance. If you go through the main entrance, they're gonna make your life hard. So that itself is no longer there. That's cool, but that would have been like a very interesting project by itself.
Like painting classes under the bohío.
Right, definitely the architecture of the space is very much in conversation with a lot of the architecture that you see in inclusive resort spaces, all-inclusive resort spaces. And yeah, like Marina said, I ended up in New York through a scholarship from this school here, and after going through, I don't know, all of these classes, near the end of my thesis, there was a room where students would leave things that they didn't want to use anymore, so someone else could use it. And I lived off of that room. So one day I found this tropical pattern and hung it in my studio, and never did anything with that while I was there. But I associated that to an experience that I had going to school with a shirt that I have thrifted, Hawaiian shirts, I guess, or tropical shirts with what you identify as a Hawaiian aesthetic. Used to be in vogue that summer, and I went to school wearing this shirt, and someone greeted me with like, "Ooh, tropical," and they did this like shoulder shimmy thing. And that just stayed with me. And at the moment, I didn't have the language to unpack that. But maybe my whole practice ever since has been about unpacking that. And but that kind of like expected performativity, and maybe if it was done to someone else, it wouldn't have clicked. But because it was done to me, I was like, what does this have to do with me? Like, what is this? And then I associated that with the fabric that I had found, and that's kind of when it all started going in that direction, I guess. But maybe to speak to the works that are in the show, there's this installation of spandex fabric and a video inside the installation called Abadi. And then there's 2 prints. And maybe I'll speak about the prints later, but in the spandex installation, I've been sourcing these fabrics that are already printed for a number of years. And I think I continue to do this in parallel to making my new patterns, as my own patterns, as Marina was saying. To kind of track or study or research this aesthetic that is deemed tropical, and like, what is this? What informs this? How is this made? And then I've ended up seeing these patterns repeating with like the way that the plants are organized, or the aesthetics of the depiction of the images. So for a lot of these installations, I stick to the more botanical things, but there's definitely more like expressive, abstract, I don't know, maracas, I don't know. All of these other motifs that are related to this imagination of what tropical is.
Yeah, and then there's the series of works that you did with the shirts as well,
right,
that had like more war, like.
Right, yeah, there's a series of shirts that it's called I Can Wear Tropical Shirts Now, in relation to that anecdote, because when that happened, I was like, I can never wear this. Like, I'm not going to be forever performing this thing. This is weird. So I started years later going back to these thrifted shirts and taking them and putting things on them, kind of like completing the picture, or like adding the things that I wish they said, or the things that I wish were related to these things, or the things that I thought informed this construction. And then I can wear this shirt now. Like, I can wear this one. So it said, like, one of them said 1995 invaders in like kind of like varsity type of font, like a football team or something, I don't know. And then this shirt is black and white and has like those very contrasty palm trees that Dave was talking about. And then it says 1995 is the date of my mom's birth, but also the date of the second U.S. invasion in the Dominican Republic. So I was thinking about these 2 events, and just thinking about invasion as a sport, or something that you do for like recreational purposes, I guess, at this point, because there's so many. There's that. There's another shirt that has like little, I was interested in the a pattern of repeated like shore, island, landscape, without any people. So like this motif of the unpeopled landscapes that repeats throughout like our history in the Caribbean, and how those places have been represented, and also in the U.S.
Definitely the empty beach. It's something that another artist in the exhibition, Sofia Galliza, she has also explored through a video that's called B-roll, and it's very much used in like government ads, like tourism ads. The like nature is always empty. It's just like
it's like a space for you to project yourself as a visitor.
Yeah, and there's a recurrent it's always like drone footage and empty spaces. Empty natural spaces.
The Bad Bunny video. Anyways, but this share that I took, I think this one I populated with prints of little boats, different types of boats. So like cruises, galleons, yachts, and military ships. Printed in fabric and then kind of sewn as a little like added little square. And so on. So I did a series of 6. And then they are also framed within a frame that opens and you can take the shirt out. And inside the frame, there's a background that is another fabric that I also appropriated from all of these patterns that I have been collecting. And usually there's a camouflage effect. Usually the shirt, sometimes it's more contrasty, but when it's camouflagey, it's the shirt that is in the frame can be confused with the pattern behind it, and that's also a comment on how these things are so like regurgitative and like just like repeated ad nauseum.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Labadie? Because it's something that I was commenting on earlier today with a group that came through. Like the Dominican Republic and Haiti share an island, but at the same time, like you left and went to Haiti on a cruise ship.
I've been to Haiti twice. And the first time was through that cruise ship. And I was basically, my mom wanted to celebrate my sister's quinceañera in this cruise, and that's like a whole thing by itself. There's a
you
whole.
have to come to terms with having participated in that.
There's a whole like industry of quinceañeras for like I don't know middle class families in the DR and probably other places that you go on a cruise for your quinceañeras, and my sister was like mortified. She had to be the main person there, and she had like a whole crisis. But I was, I lived in New York, and my family lived in the DR at the time, and it was another opportunity to see them in addition to the usual like Christmas visit. So I agreed to go to this thing, even though I really dislike all-inclusive experiences, to say the least. But I went with my camera. So I could document my family and document the environment. So the cruise stopped in 4 places. Montego Bay was one of them. Labadie in Haiti.
What is the name that Royal Caribbean gave the beach? I know that they renamed it.
It's Labadie, but with 2 E's. Mm-hmm. And then the regular way of writing, it's with IE. It's named after, I think, like a French captain or something. But the town is called Labadie IE, and Labadie EE is trademarked by Royal Caribbean. And it's also like this total construct. I think now they're a little more transparent that they're taking you to actual Haiti. But if you look at like the way that they talked about this trip in years before, there was like a whole... They
didn't want to scare people.
Yeah, there's a whole like... way of talking about the experience without mentioning that this is Haiti. And then Labadie is talked about as this non-place or like this island even. Like I think I've seen it named an island.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So as you will see in the video or have seen if you've seen it already, it's when you arrive to Labadie, there's this fenced off beach that has all of these recreational opportunities that Royal Caribbean manages inside the all-inclusive beach that they created. So they don't own the beach, but they
probably lease it.
They lease it for like 90 years or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, that's the same situation in the Bahamas.
Right.
Like Disney owns part, like a key,
Right. But then in Labadie, as opposed to the other 3 stops of this cruise, you couldn't just take a taxi and go to a museum or go to your own beach or like go do your own kind of recreational situation for 4 hours and then run back to the cruise. You had to stay within the island, the beach, because it's fenced off and there's like different layers of like there's a concrete wall and like wire and like barbed wire and like all these things. that limit how you can access the space beyond what they give you. And everything inside Labadee is, all the revenues go back to Royal Caribbean. Like even the souvenir sellers that I talked to, they told me they had to pay Royal Caribbean a fee to be able to sell their things there. And I think that's also stated in the video through the subtitles.
Some of the subtitles are from the diary, but some is also your own, right?
Yeah, most of it is my own writing. The beginning, like the first, I don't know, 2 or 3 lines are from Columbus's diary when they were in their voyage to
The part in the cruise ship is like Columbus.
the part of the cruise ship where you see the water. I was thinking a lot about that idea because not only because of like the experience of being in this big boat in like open sea that I had never experienced, but also because of there's touristic like brochures and things like that that are recreating this language of like imagine yourself as
Explore
this, yeah. Follow the footsteps of Columbus. There's a lot of that in magazines that I'm looking at now from the DR. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Because it's like the first place where
the first settlement.
Yeah. The first place they arrived to was Bahamas, Guarani, and then they settled in what is today Santo Domingo. So there's a lot of like retrace the footsteps, blah blah blah, in like touristic print and matter from the 70s and 80s. But yeah, and then the prints near and then also for you to enter the space to see the video, you have to go through this spandex installation that was inspired by, I guess, my first exhibition in the Bahamas, actually, in 2017, which was also the first time that I showed that video.
And that I saw your
And
work.
that you saw those works, yeah. Where I was invited to do this show, and it was with Didi Brown, a Bahamian artist, and we were talking about what the show was gonna be, and there was a subject of like insider, outsider, and like visitor and local, and all these things were in dialogue. So I was interested in kind of dividing the space, and because the Bahamas is like such an overwhelmingly, divided place in terms of like what is for locals and what is for tourists, to the point that they even have like their own island or whatever, like Atlantis, no? That's just for tourists.
Paradise Island is like 75% resort.
Right.
Belongs to Atlantis Resort.
Right. So I was really interested in exploring this idea of the barriers that, divide spaces. So the spandex ended up being an application of that research, of those patterns that I had been appropriating and learning about and collecting and seeing the similarities, but then also like physically expanding into space and then obstructing space and making your experience a little more like, I guess, a little more difficult, but also just making you aware of how you move through space or how you move freely through space until you get to this barrier. So you have to go inside the spandex part to see the video, and then there's a reclining chair like the ones that you see in touristic spaces where you sit on, and I'm thinking about this kind of physical relationship of the viewer, or like implying the viewer in the narrative through the act of sitting on these chairs.
It's also generous so that you sit comfortably.
Also, yes.
Now, what's the significance of the hole in the wall? It's like a kidney-shaped hole.
Yeah, it's that started being part of the language of those installations from early on. Initially, the holes were the way that you will get to the other side of the installation. Like originally, the installations were not as architectural. They were like a piece
slits.
of spandex.
Right,
yeah.
right.
That was, stretched in a big stretcher, and then there was slits, and you would like stretch the slit and go in. But also, it's kind of echoing some of the architecture of the cruise. When you're sitting and looking at the cruise, there's like this kind of
right.
windows and this like curvy, I don't know.
And it also breaks up that barrier.
Right. It also gives you like visual access. Yeah.
You can peep into the installation.
Right. And then the 2 collages are from postcards that I have been collecting for a while.
Where Where did you get the historic images?
The historic images.
Where do they belong to?
They are. So I've been collecting physical postcards and then also historic images in digital form because the Public Library of New York is not going to give me their historic images. But it's like images that have defined visual culture in the Caribbean in a way or another. So there's one that's a postcard from Martinique. Actually, both of them are postcards from Martinique, the color one in the front. And then in the back, one of them is a photo from kind of like an ethnographic photographer from the late 1800s that was also in Martinique, photographing subjects, people, and was part of this whole moment where, I guess the moment that precedes the contemporary, or maybe now it's past, but postcard production that we're used to seeing, where you have this like classification of people, like or types of people that started racially as like the negres or like the octogon or whatever, to that then migrated into classifying types of characters. So then you have like the carbon seller or like the fruit seller or the so that image belongs to that moment. And then there's another photo from a sugarcane plantation that is picturing the people that work in the plantation, and they're all kind of like eating a piece of sugar cane. And that was like, you know, similar to what Oneika was saying, that performativity. So it's not that they're doing this for the camera, for the visitors that were coming. And that photo is from a cruise, actually, from like I have to find the actual information, but it's from Saint Croix, from tourists that were in a Saint Croix cruise. Yeah.
It's I mean, those images really synthesize what the show is about, what the essay is about, and also synthesizes the visits. Especially when I was in Jamaica, where like you would go from one place to the other, and like they would point out like this is like this hotel, and it used to be X plantation, and this is the big house, and like these are all places that have gone from being, you know, places that enslaved people to places that are now presented as tourist destinations and like desirable spaces to be and to go for leisure and enjoy, etc. And like there's even a tour in like a haunted house tour.
Rose Hall.
Rose Hall.
Okay, you went there.
On that cruise ship. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you go during the day or at night?
During the day.
I went at night.
Oh my gosh, you're
There's
brave.
a whole representation of, you know, of the ghosts of the place. No, I mean, I had to go. It's like it's for research, but it's also I'm just very ¿cómo se dice morbosa?
I don't know how to say that.
Morbid.
Morbid.
But I think morbid is different.
Maybe.
Because morbid in English refers to death, no?
It's like you have a tendency
Like a fascination.
Okay,
Like a
okay,
fascination
okay.
with things that are just like so, you know, so terrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think that in maybe a big problem that we still have in Puerto Rico is that we definitely haven't come to terms with the fact that we have that same history, and these are like in Rio Grande, where where a lot of hotels are, not all, but where a lot of the hotels are, like those used to be sugar plantations. It's just not as present in how we understand the spaces, but it's the same history, and it's repeated all over the Caribbean.
You mean you don't acknowledge as publicly like what this space was in Puerto Rico?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I think that it also has a lot to do with the fact that like sugar became more of a bigger industry once like after the American invasion.
In Puerto Rico?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So actually, that's when there was more of a growth in that sector.
Yeah, and
Maybe it used to be before as well, but there was just way, way much more. Like that's when it really became like a monoculture.
I was gonna say
crop.
in the Caribbean is very fragmented and just has different experiences and histories because like in I think the Spanish Caribbean when the Spanish first came after they discovered Mexico invaded Mexico and Central America, that was like where the whole emphasis was, and the Caribbean was pseudo
Relegated.
abandoned, and then you
Yeah,
have
'cause then we
France
didn't have gold.
and
It's
then
like,
right, and then you have France coming in and like doing their like super mega exploitative project with what is today Haiti, and like there's all of these different things at play, and then all of these people, all of these countries are competing against each other, and so I think
and undermining each other as well, like
Yeah.
pirating and stuff.
there's something with Puerto Rico and in the Dominican Republic where it's kind of in the same context, but then you have these different moments where like sugar, there was a point in the DR where it wasn't as important anymore. And it was more like a cattle based economy.
Yeah, we had more of a diversified agricultural sector
Yeah.
before the American invasion. And I think that also makes a big difference, where like some people would idealize the time before the American invasion and maybe like not criticize it as much, just to emphasize the criticism on the American impact. And I guess that also, I think that Sophia's work in the show, while it's not about any kind of like big house or in a plantation or anything like that, but it definitely speaks to like what is preserved, what kind of architecture is preserved, and why. And I think that a lot of these like big like former plantation houses are preserved in a way, and they're not as criticized in Puerto Rico at the time, like now. They're not. They are being contextualized now because they are under. A lot of them are under the care of a particular like conservation trust, para la naturaleza, and it's a private entity, and they are doing the contextualizing, but it's not something that is really done broadly, like in school,
Okay.
know.
Yeah, I think one of the things hearing you speak about the having it but not necessarily engaging is like to even think about the difference in approach. So I would think one of the things, I think you would have gone to Devon House, right? Yeah, it's a plantation in a way. It's a plantation style house in the center of Kingston, but the main thing is that it's the house of the first black millionaire that which was like a real thing, had also not enslaved people but servants. That's what they were called, and now it's flipped into a space that people come to visit it. But there's definitely the colonial legacy, and so I think one of the proposals that people are still trying as well, how do we add to that space, how do we make people aware, is it was the Jamaica Biennial then, was hosted inside the
That's what I was
the
going to
space.
mention, actually.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually, this room reminds me a lot of one of the rooms where artists were asked to engage with one room. One work I had at one point was, there was a little girl's room, which was, it had the little, I think it's, what do you call it, a pram, a crib, where you put the doll in, and all the little mirrors and things from a time long ago. And you had artists engaging with like what happened in that room, what's the history. And I think that's a really important way that could happen. Yeah, I don't know.
Certainly. I think that we have to start wrapping things up and opening it up to the public. Yeah, so Carla, take it away.
Hi everyone. We would like to open for questions if you have any questions.
If you're so inclined, raise your hand.
Yes. So we can also wrap up, and we have a reception next door. I would like to invite everyone to the reception. So again, thank you very much. Thank you, please, all our panelists, moderator, and thank you everyone for coming and joining us here at America Society.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.